So DC Comics looks like it's done, right? They laid off pretty much all their artists, and DC as a thing is pretty much finished. So they haven't said, hey, we're going to, and this happened yesterday. They just laid off all their artists basically and their designers and stuff. And this has got to do with the new merger, where they're like, hey, we're going to cut this off. So while they're not, so the big question is, what happens now? Is DC going to just stop making comics? No. According to the internal stuff, it looks like they're going to make one final go to kind of make this profitable, and then probably sell off the properties, or not sell them off, but lease them out. We're not talking Marvel because they're bought by Warner Brothers. They're owned by Warner Brothers. But we are talking, we're going to see a lot less comics. And the reason for this is, one, the pandemic has pretty much killed stores as such. Everything, yeah. But this was coming for a while. Even with the digitalization of everything, they also had their own streaming service, which is not very good. And that's where we are.
One of the big problems as well with the streaming service is that HBO Max has all that stuff as well anyway.
Yeah.
So what they've done effectively is that they've made it so that anyone who could use that streaming service just for DC shows is basically wasting their money.
Yeah.
Because they can get that on HBO Max.
But as I said, there was a time when I spent €30 a week on comics, right? And then it went down to just spending maybe €20 a month. Since the pandemic, I haven't bought a comic book. I don't miss it. It's not something that I miss doing, and that's a bad sign. I'd much rather pick up a trade or an older book. So I'm like, if I was in the comic industry, either working as a retailer or working in the industry, I'd be terrified, because I'm like, yeah, this is the end. And it really does feel like we're getting to that point. Well, what do you guys think? Do you guys think we are at the end of comics, or do you guys still read I know we've all read comics, but do you guys actively read them? That's my kind of question. Or do you have any interest in what's going on?
Not terribly. It's just, I could never really kind of get it. I never got in on the ground floor when I was younger, so I never got into it coming in. As I grew up, so I only really jumped into the major tentpole series, some of the major kind of Marvel DC stuff, Image stuff.
Yeah.
So I never got into the comic scene. But yeah, it definitely feels it's been on the it feels as if though it's been on the decline for a while, and the market really is in more indie stuff.
Yeah.
Especially cheaper stuff, man. Yeah, comics have also just kind of gotten, for the most part, too damn expensive.
Yeah, you're talking nearly €5 for a book. What about you, Katie? What do you think?
I used to read comics kind of when I was a kid, and that was purely because my brother would get them first, read them, and then give them to me. And then as I got older and I started working and being an artist and not having disposable income, it got to the point where it was okay, I can't justify this anymore.
Yeah,
as much as I loved it, it's it was, I hate saying, an unnecessary expenditure. And then I got into video games and stuff, so I would rather something that I can interact with, because that kind of takes my mind away somewhere else, away from work. So when it comes down to it, it's video games or comics, it's going to be video games.
And that's it. And I think, Bryn, you'd kind of be the same as me, where you've read a bunch of books but wouldn't be actively collecting anymore, right?
No, but I mean, for me, it's always been a case of because I used to, I had my books that I actively bought until the comic book shop I went to in Cork closed down.
Yeah. And
then it was just well, I guess I'm not buying comics anymore. And then, from there, for me, I fell out of the loop of buying. And then once you fall out of that loop of buying, you don't really pick it back up again unless you're looking for something very specific.
That's it. And that's what happens. That's what happens. Yeah.
For me, it was a case of the last couple, when I got back in, one of the last things I was actively spent money on getting all the trades for was Transmetropolitan, which is my favorite comic series of all time. But because I knew that's one of those things where I go, well, this is however expensive it is, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to read it over and over again. and
Yeah.
I'd rather read that with paper than get digital editions. But like now I'm at the point where I would, I will look for specific runs. But even then, there's runs out there that I want to read, but they're too expensive. Like
here's
just
the thing.
the other week,
Sorry, go on.
just to finish off my point, like just the other week I was looking at there was an anthology trade for the Dark Multiverse in DC, and I was like, I have to get that. And then I saw how much it was, and I was like, don't have to read it that badly, and put it back down again. Like,
well, that's the thing. Mutsumo brings up two good points in the chat. The first one, New 52 being cancelled. One of the that was a really good series. It was a really good series, but DC kept doing this thing where they kept rebooting the franchise, the series over and over again,
and faster and faster,
and faster. Yeah, and one, it brings in a whole, like, I get it. It leaves that open-ended point for people to jump in, but that's not how comics work. You can just jump in and read back, and that's the fun of it. So that kind of isolated.
As well as that, like, stop rebooting the same superheroes. If you want to do something new, do something new.
Yeah, no, repeating the same franchise always just made the scene just kind of seem impenetrable, because you're like, where do I possibly jump into this?
Yeah, it kind of did the opposite of what they wanted to do. Sorry, Brett.
This is what the idea of Elseworlds was, though, is that you could do these random, like, I was speaking for DC Comics, like for Marvel they had What If, but like for the whole idea of Elseworlds is that you would be able to do alternate lines and do alternate ideas for stories. And like, because like, yeah, I mean, like there's always going to be stories, especially like, I mean, some of the most celebrated stuff in comics tends to be self-contained enough that you don't need a huge continuity, like just using Batman as example, like stuff like the Long Halloween, Dark Victory, Hush, they all link into each other, but you could read them all independently and not really have a feel for what came before, because you don't need it.
You don't need to. Well, here's another thing, right? Sepon Sedek makes a lot of his comics free online because he knows not everyone can afford modern day comic books. He's the real MVP. Like, here's the thing: what you said, all those books are correct and really good recommendations, Bryn. But the thing about it is, you can go and get those trades, and it's been 20 years since those books have come out. Yeah. Nothing, with the exception of maybe Zack Snyder's books, would kind of equal it. And even then, they've rebooted so much, so it's kind of hard to. But like, if someone asked me what comics should I read, I'd probably mention those ones. I wouldn't, and maybe Court of Owls and Black Mirror. But other than that, I wouldn't really recommend anything from the past couple of years.
Yeah, well, I think that's been like the big challenge as well. So like, even, I mean, like, I was a diehard Spider-Man fan for years, and it's been one of those things where, because of a lot of the decisions they made with the character in the last 10 years, it just made me go, well, I don't want to read this.
Yeah.
I'm not even interested in keeping up with it anymore.
Yeah, and see, that's what some people have said. They've said that a lot of the agenda pushing, for want of a better word, with comics, they've like torn off people. And look, I hate using that word, so please forgive me.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people who would say, "Oh, I want this," and they don't buy books, and it's like, well, you're not buying the books, and this is who they're aiming towards. Yeah. And you violate your audience. No one's buying the books then.
So like the general feeling I have towards a lot of like the quote unquote agenda orientated stuff is, I don't see any demand for it. All I see is across the board discrimination. So all it's doing is annoying everyone.
Yeah.
Like,
that's
because
how I say it too.
It makes people who hate the idea of, like, they've got, what was it, like some of the new characters they created were like Safe Space and but even Safe Space on its own, but like even Safe Space on its own, who's that for? Like, legitimately, who's that for?
It
just came off like they were being insulting to.
Yeah, but it's like they were trying to be topical, but like,
without having any foot in the game, without knowing a goddamn thing about what they're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And what I say is, like, what you guys said about rebooting characters. And that's why in the indies it's good, because you can explore these new stories without going, pissing off an entire fan base. Now, here's one for question though. I saw someone on Twitter raise recently, why can't they go back to cheap newsprint? Nobody is demanding premium glossy paper. Well, the argument for that would be, well, everything is digital, but you're still going to not pay that. You know what I mean? Like, it's a premium product. As Katie, you said, it's not an essential product. So when you buy a book, you expect a certain thing, but that's kind of expensive. So I think there's two things going on here. There's one, there's the cost. There's two, what we kind of said last week with the demand away from physical goods going more digital, you know, and also then they need to focus on storytelling rather than trying to chase the dragon, you know. And don't get me wrong, like I will read anything, you know, and I did, and I bought comics for consistently about 5 years, as in like spending €30 for about 5 years. It's why I have literally 6 long boxes in the other room. I can't get rid of them. I have 6 long boxes.
It's actually funny though that you mention the kind of the newsprint thing, because another factor, like working in a bookshop myself, another factor I've noticed that like really has kind of declined comic sales has been the uptick in manga sales.
Yes, that's
which is much cheaper.
Yeah.
And like especially with the rise of like these gargantuan series like Hero Academia and Demon Slayer recently, like they've just taken off and become like the new flagships.
But see, the thing about that is it's a complete opposite to Western comics, right? It's focused on stories. It knows what it is. It doesn't really push and look, again, I don't like to use the word, but agenda, right?
Well, no, it can. Like I sell a handful of pretty kind of diverse comics, and
I'm not talking.
I'm
not talking about diverse comics. I'm talking about stuff being done solely to pop a rating. Pop an interest. You know, I'm not talking about like, you know, a series that's what it's based on.
Don't get me wrong. There is stuff in there. There is stuff that's selling that is chasing trends, like the isekai transported to another realm thing. Man, that has been rampant over the past couple of years in like terms of manga production. So like there's trends being chased, just different trends.
Here's a question actually as well, because you would know working in a bookshop. Monster wants to know, why is manga so much cheaper?
It's like black and white, so there's no coloring. It's much cheaper, like paper quality. It's not glossy. It's like newsprint, and it tends to be just kind of smaller volume size. Like it's about A5. It's size of smaller, like a small kind of novel. It's literally just cheaper all around the board and kind of more regular. Like,
but you see, the thing that I find weird about that is that like it's not like these kind of books didn't exist in Western comics. Like A History of Violence is written in the exact same way as that.
Yeah.
So why is there not more A History of Violence has been written and being like produced outside of like, I mean, like History of Violence was done on Vertigo, which, I mean, how long ago did Vertigo die? Like,
sure, even V for Vendetta as well, the same thing. Yeah.
You know, but it's, I mean, like this is one of those areas where I just find it very weird because, like, it's not like, you know, I mean, like it's not like there isn't a demand for, you know, one-shot stories and
Mouse as well. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
that's
Mouse
true,
is great as well.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic.
You know, I think that's on the Leaving Cert now.
Is it?
I think it's on. I think it's like it's available for selection in the comparative text.
You see, I think what happened there, Brent, to pick up your point, we went through the 90s, and remember the 90s, guys, where they had the glossy print and the variants and all that kind of stuff. So people kind of got used to it. It's just this unsustainable chasing the ghost kind of thing, you know. But look, actually, Katie, you said something last week, and I wanted to see if it kind of checks in this, right? So you said that you like digital like products as such, you know, compared to VHS players.
Mm-hmm.
On this specific topic, if I was to hand you a comic or something digitally that you could read on a tablet, what would you prefer?
So that, for me, that's kind of a trick question now, because if I'm going to read something, I much prefer the feel of a book. But when I'm done with it, I don't want to keep it.
So libraries would suit you better.
Libraries would suit me, yeah, because like I don't have a lot of storage space, but I still do enjoy the feel of a book.
Yeah.
See, that's kind of the problem now that I think they haven't overcome, and this is why it's probably failing as well. Like it's a product that once you're finished with it, like an actual comic, you bag and board it, and then it lives in a long box.
Yeah,
that's what happens. Like, so it's like it's kind of hard to get rid of, you know.
Outside of like a handful of books, like I mean, I've read. Outside of the numerous trades and stuff that I have, I've reread
trades are slightly different.
But like, I mean, even just taking a trade as an example where it's like a 6-issue thing. Like I've reread History of Violence, I've reread Transmetropolitan, I've reread V for Vendetta and Watchmen, and the Batman books mentioned previously. I've reread them, but after them, that list of what I've reread gets very, very thin very, very quickly, because the amount of books where it's anything more than just, oh, that was enjoyable, is like the amount of books that are just like, oh yeah, I enjoyed that, and that's all I have to say on them.
See,
is vast.
There's no genre defining comics, with the exception of some Batman books. But again, it's a Batman book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But I mean,
but here's one here.
I'm not even looking for something to be genre defining. Like, I love Maximum Carnage from the mid 90s, but Maximum Carnage is not a story that defines Spider-Man in any significant way. It's not even really significant or emblematic of its time period, but I enjoy the story, even though the ending to it is trite. Like,
the Clone Saga is terrible.
Would it be fair to say that the comics industry is probably also, or had also started going through a superhero fatigue as well?
I would say so.
Like,
I would say so, yeah.
I don't know exactly when it'll come out, but like you were talking about the fact there hasn't been any flagship superhero series coming out. Like, the biggest series I can think of from the past 10 years would be Saga.
Yeah.
So like it seems like that the comics industry now, or at least, you know, the kind of the demand for it was moving away from superheroes and something just so kind of more off kilter, which also shows why Image kind of started becoming such the massive company it is.
If you look at the big hits in terms of series in the last 10, 15, 20 years, East of West, Saga, Why Last Man, like just to name, like The Walking Dead. Yeah, all of them are. I'm pretty sure all of them are Image, and like, I mean, that kind of just shows that like the demand is gaining more and more towards what you're saying, where it is going away from being superheroes, which is so weird when superheroes have never been more mainstream than they are.
Well, here's one for you. Here's one for you. What do you think about this comment? I would argue that nowadays a comic book is also merch. In a time when everything is digital, it's nice to have a physical object linking you to the franchise or fandom that you like. What I would say to that before you jump in, comic books and even the comic cons, which is what we probably would have been at this weekend, just gone. The smallest section are comics. You go to a comic con and there's like 2 long boxes and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, if I want to go to a quiet place in a comic book, I'll go over to the comic sellers. Yeah. I'd be like, hey guys, how's it going? You know, it's like, it seems like superheroes and comics are now the lowest thing, even in a time when they've never been popular. And this is what they've said with Marvel. Marvel apparently is going to go this way too, where the properties and IPs are going to be huge, but the comics, I think we're getting to the end of this, guys.
Yeah. I don't think we're getting to the end of the medium by any.
No, but as it exists today, as this massive thing.
Yeah. I mean that's I still think that remains to be seen. I think the idea of them being sold in specific brick and mortar shops, that's gone. That's done. That's finished. Okay. But like, you see, like, again, there's a bunch of different materials that there still is a demand, even if it is a small demand. There is a demand for physical material in it being sold. And the best way to see what happens when that physical material loses its demand is look at what GameStop are doing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Even specifically towards comics, like look at what Forbidden Planet are kind of doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look at Forbidden Planet. Look at Tower Records, for God's sake. Like, you know,
Katie, it's half a merchandise store in front of the stuff they actually used to sell. Sorry, Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, go on, Katie.
I was just going to say, I think part of the problem is because, like you were saying, superheroes have never been more popular than they are now. And I think that's part of the problem, because you've got movies, you've got TV shows, you've got video games. And a lot of, like myself personally, a lot of people don't have the time to sit and read. And they're like, well, why would I read a book when I can see it? It's right there in front of me.
Yeah,
but it's also, that's a really good point, though, because we're also at a point now where, like, I mean, we're also part of a generation that considers a TV show of Batman to be the definitive Batman. You know, we're the same generation feels the same way about a specific Spider-Man show.
Yeah,
like when you get to a point where you're not looking at the medium it originated from as being the definitive version of it, that's a sign that there is a disconnect between what the fan base, how the fan base feels about feels about it. Like, I mean, again, look at Ninja Turtles. Ninja Turtles started as comics, but how many people, if you mention the Ninja Turtles, think of comics?
Yeah,
you know.
I think I think that's a very good point as well, and it's something that we do kind of forget, and it's something I think this is a perfect storm of things. You know, it's not just one specific thing; it's like an array of things.
Absolutely.
And we kind of hit all of them. I think all of us are right, but it's something that like it's been coming for a long time. And while the diehards is like clutching to your comic, going, "This is my comic," you know, this is what I love. But
this is my comic. There are many like it, but this one is mine.
But you know, and then you're kind of sitting there going, "But wait, most people would rather play a video game." And even the kids, like, you know, I have younger cousins and they love comics. One of them's going into actually designing comics and stuff like that, and that's great. But how many, you know, how much work is he going to get, right? Is there going to be an industry here? Probably not. Go into game design, which makes more sense, you know, this kind of stuff. We are the last generation to kind of remember a world before the internet, but then be raised in the internet, and this is kind of like the last gasp, I think, of this. Katie, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just on that point. I was just going to say, like, when you have somebody like, say, Rocksteady announce a new Batman game, and everybody goes nuts, how many of those people would do the same if they were to announce a Batman comic?
Very few. And look, and the sales show that, you know, like, as much as I love going into a comic book shop, to be fair, you go in and it's mostly a toy shop now at this point, but I like going to, and again, Comic-Con is like case in point. You walk into Comic-Con, you know, back in the before time, and you know, how much
before the event,
before the event, exactly.
Remain indoors.
How much of it would be comics? Not that much. How many people in there would have read a comic? Very few, or it would be one of 5. It's just a weird thing, you know. It's I think we've all known it, we've all like been aware of it, and we've seen it in other medium, but now but now it's like, oh, right, we're going into a recession and cuts need to be made. I think
it's definitely just going to be a very major shift in the culture of the industry, and I think it's going to go the